Hello, my name is Liv Torzon, and my project is on Laocoon and his sons, the sculpture you see here. My thesis is centered around the fact that since the excavation of this sculpture, it has acted as an artistic canon and the ideal form of classicism, while also being a central node for debating the condition of art. It is the combination of the intense suffering that is depicted in this sculpture and the many theories which surround its historical context that are what make this sculpture remain topical and relevant. The statue was discovered in 1506 current era on a Roman vineyard in an underground room by the Florentine architect Giuliano Sangallo, who had been sent there by Pope Julius II after hearing rumors of beautiful statues being unearthed in this vineyard. And with Sangallo was also Italian sculptor Michelangelo. And besides a couple of limbs, the Laocoon sculpture group was apparently discovered in excellent condition, and Sangallo was able to immediately identify the discovered statue as Pliny's Laocoon and his sons. Pliny the Elder was a revered Roman author who had written about the magnificent Laocoon sculpture group, calling it superior to any painting or bronze. He praised it beyond measure, which contributed to the Laocoon group being one of the most revered lost treasures of Rome. It is widely believed that the Laocoon sculpture group depicts the dramatic scene from the Roman poet Virgil's Aeneid, and it's the story of Laocoon actually succumbing to the serpent attack, as it was his punishment by the gods for his effort to warn the Trojans, which might have set in motion the end to the Trojan War, which they didn't want. So the center figure is meant to represent Laocoon, and then the two young men on his sides are his sons, who are also being tortured as his punishment. Only months after the 1506 discovery of the Laocoon sculpture group, it's sold to Pope Julius II, and the Pope installs this monumental sculpture group in his newly finished sculpture courtyard in the Vatican. And immediately, the Laocoon group becomes a crowd favorite. Countless artists and sculptors come to the Vatican to study this sculpture. There are even competitions around the sculpture group, who can build the best arm for Laocoon's missing arm, as you can see in that picture on the left. But with this sculpture group's immediate fame, people also started to question the sculpture's authenticity. People were questioning if this Laocoon was the same one from Pliny's Natural History, because this sculpture group was missing two key facets from Pliny's account. First, the discovered statue group is constructed from 7 pieces of marble, whereas Pliny had described it as having been carved from just one. Second, the fine spot of this Laocoon was not quite matching up with what Pliny had said. So this was really the beginning of the sculpture group's contested origins and its authenticity, and if it really was the Greek original. The relationship between Michelangelo and the Laocoon group is profound. The sculpture group had a formative and significant influence on Michelangelo's style of muscular anatomy, which is an artistic style that evokes deep suffering, which is distinctly discernible in Laocoon and his sons, and is particularly present in Michelangelo's commissions for Julius II. The figures are exhibiting similar poses to the Laocoon group in what's called contrapposto, which means counterpose, essentially by placing most of the weight on one foot. The figure's shoulders and arms twist off axis from the hips and legs, which gives the figures a more dynamic and a more emotional appearance. Another notable person who was also deeply inspired by the Laocoon sculpture group was J.J. Winckelmann. Winckelmann wrote extensively on his admiration for the Laocoon group. In his visual analysis of the sculpture, he praised it in its depiction as an archetype of Stoic virtue. In 1764, Winckelmann endeavored on creating what was the first comprehensive and chronological history of art. And notably in this book, he worked on the structuring of ancient Greek and Roman art into successive periods. And so when it came to dating the Laocoon, Winckelmann acknowledged those discrepancies that had been surrounding the sculpture group's authenticity, yet he still boldly assigned a 4th century BCE date. Worth noting, however, the Laocoon group is now seldom, if ever, given a date as early as the 4th century. Something else that Winckelmann wrote about was this idea that we revere this sculpture as being so beautiful and superior, yet the sculpture is depicting men in what are their final moments alive and experiencing such torture. So it was in Winckelmann's writings and in his dating of the Laocoon group that stimulated further critical discussion. For example, in G.E. Lessing's theories of translating art. And he was essentially stating that it was impossible for the Laocoon sculpture to express the intense screams that were depicted originally in Virgil's poems, because sculptures and paintings can only ever depict a singular moment. Lessing was arguing that poetry is therefore superior and triumphant in comparison because it could depict objects in motion. Additionally, Lessing also dated the Laocoon with a much more modern date than Winckelmann had, and this contributed to the shift of the Laocoon sculpture group being viewed as a quintessential reference for classical art to now becoming a contested trope of criticism, which also later stimulated writings from Goethe in his concept of translating visual perception into critical text as an intermedial form itself, giving the Laocoon another newfound role as a prime exemplum of art theory and the condition of art. Views such as Mary Beard's translate the debated origin of the Laocoon as a classic dilemma in Greco-Roman sculpture. It is simply false to suppose that there is a particular place to which this sculpture can be assigned. Whether or not the Laocoon is a copy is not a question to be settled, but more so a prompt to explore the many ways in which the Laocoon engages through time with its tradition and with its changing environment.